For over a century, Buckingham Palace has stood as the ultimate symbol of the British monarchy's power. It has witnessed grand weddings, solemn coronations, and silent tragedies unfolding behind its ancient stone walls. On the 29th of July, millions around the world watched the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer, a love story celebrated as a modern-day fairy tale. The dazzling white dress, the flower-draped balcony, the cheering crowds waving joyfully to the newlyweds. Yet behind the smiles on that balcony, there stood another presence. A woman once described as Diana's worst nightmare, Camilla Parker Bowles. When Princess Diana died in a tragic car accident in 1997, Britain was plunged into mourning. But from that moment of national grief, Charles and Camilla began a long and arduous journey, a quest to reclaim dignity and gain public acceptance. Despite public outrage, royal coldness, and an adulterous past that could never be erased.
I believe that Diana was suffering from a severe psychological disorder, and I think that she had this disorder when she went into the relationship.
This is the story of the years after Diana, the quiet battle to transform Camilla from a secret mistress into the Duchess of Cornwall, and eventually, Queen Consort, a chapter of royal history filled with controversy, where the honor of the crown and the heart of the British public have never truly found reconciliation. On the day they were wed, the whole of Britain believed a fairy tale had finally come true. But within the thick walls of Kensington Palace, a parallel relationship was quietly taking shape, and would soon become a crack too deep to conceal. Diana Spencer, only 19 at the time, entered her marriage to Prince Charles with the innocent trust of a young woman unaware of the cold reality behind royal life.
But neither was she just a hanger-on. There was no one leader. They were all headstrong, very lively girls.
Beneath the flashbulbs and the cheers, she quickly realized her husband's heart still belonged to someone else. Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman Charles had never truly left behind. The signs came early, persistent and cruel. Midnight phone calls, intimate letters, secret meetings. Meticulously arranged, Diana began to understand she wasn't just battling loneliness, but an unnamed rival. A past that had never ended.
Charles is like a very old-fashioned, very respectful, charming man. He likes women.
In later interviews, Diana spoke of her wedding night, the moment she discovered a special gift from Charles. Not for her, but for Camilla. Amid all the regal rituals, a wound had been opened, one that would grow quietly, painfully. With time, years later, when asked what truly destroyed the marriage, Diana didn't need many words. Just one sentence, simple, yet powerful enough to shake the world. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. I know, it wasn't just a bitter confession. It was the moment the public realized that behind the grandeur, the heart of a young bride had been suffocating from the very beginning. The marriage once hoped to redeem the royal family's image had become nothing more than an empty shell. Diana sought new meaning in her role through charity, humanitarian missions, and work with international organizations. But no matter how far she traveled, the shadow of that parallel affair silently followed her like an inescapable fate. In the eyes of the public, Diana became the embodiment of compassion, a woman who was not only a symbol but also a victim of an unforgiving system.
Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, because at one point she was vilified by the media, that it was always negative.
And when she began to speak openly about her pain, the empathy of millions across Britain only grew stronger. Though the divorce was official, the ties between Diana and the royal family were never truly severed. Her final public images, radiant on the outside, yet fragile within, planted a quiet unease in the hearts of the people that perhaps the tragedy was not yet over. And then came that fateful night in August, 1997. A Mercedes sped through the Alma Tunnel in Paris, trailed closely by a swarm of relentless paparazzi. Just minutes later, the car slammed into a concrete pillar, crushing all remaining hope of a new life for Diana after the collapse of her marriage. And then came that fateful night in August, 1997. A Mercedes sped through the Alma Tunnel in Paris, trailed closely by a swarm of relentless paparazzi. Just minutes later, the car slammed into a concrete pillar, crushing all remaining hope of a new life for Diana after the collapse of her marriage.
So that's why she's has asked all of us to acknowledge that wish and accept her as the wife of Prince Charles, as a Queen Consort when he becomes king.
As news spread to Britain, the entire nation was engulfed in shock and fury. Millions of white flowers began to cover the gates of Kensington Palace. On television, people wept as if mourning a loved one, because Diana was never just a princess. She was the embodiment of hope and humanity amid a cold and rigid monarchy.
And devotion as sovereign never wavered, through times of change and progress, through times of joy and celebration.
In those chaotic hours, Charles made a decision that surprised many. He flew to Paris himself to retrieve the body of his former wife, a gesture both of duty and a silent, belated apology. But even in tragedy, the royal family remained divided. When Charles returned, with the flag-draped coffin, Queen Elizabeth II firmly opposed a state funeral, arguing that Diana was no longer a member of the royal family, a justification that ignited the public's deepest outrage. And in those early days of September, as millions queued to lay down flowers and say their goodbyes, the grief wasn't only for the loss of one woman. It was a searing indictment of the frozen heart of an entire dynasty. To millions of Britons, Camilla was not just another woman. She was the other woman, the symbol of betrayal that many believed had pushed Diana into tragedy. At the time, the media dubbed her the most hated woman in Britain, a cruel label, but one not easily erased. Even after Diana's passing, Camilla's presence alongside Charles was still seen as a public insult to the memory of the princess. They couldn't appear together in public, couldn't attend charity events hand in hand. I couldn't walk the palace steps before the flash of cameras, yet behind closed doors. And a different reality was quietly unfolding. Charles never intended to leave Camilla. To him, she was the only sense of peace he had left after years of turmoil. Some royal aides later revealed that just weeks after Diana's funeral, there were already late-night phone calls and unmarked cars quietly bringing Camilla to Highgrove, the country estate Charles kept as his private refuge. There, under dim lights, they would share quiet dinners, unburden themselves, and escape the crushing weight of public judgment. But while Charles may have seen Camilla as his final harbour, many within the royal family still viewed her as a threat to the Windsor dynasty's honour. An unspoken battle dragged on for years. Should the monarchy sever ties to protect its image, or accept her and face the political consequences? In that tense atmosphere, there were moments of raw, private bitterness, Camilla's quiet, awkward meetings with William and Harry, two young boys still reeling from the loss of their mother. One eyewitness recalled that the first time William entered a room where Camilla was present, the silence was so heavy, It felt suffocating. They exchanged only a few polite words, then retreated, each into their own solitude. These were the days when the royal family no longer felt like a family, but a suffocating maze of guilt, grief, and decisions no one wanted to bear. Time did little to ease the public's outrage. Every photo of Camilla leaving Highgrove became fresh fuel for the tabloids. And each time William and Harry appeared in public, the same question lingered in people's minds. Could they ever forgive the woman once seen as the cause of their mother's suffering, right up to her final moments? But for Charles,
Shouldn't think Prince Charles got the slightest clue what it could possibly be like to be Camilla.
a clear choice had already been made. If he wanted to salvage any happiness in the later years of his life, he would have to find the courage to go public. Inside Clarence House, a quiet campaign had begun. Seasoned media advisors were brought in. They knew one thing for certain: Camilla could not face the public as the husband stealer. If she was ever to be accepted, she would need to embody a warm, humble presence, the opposite of the cold, calculated image the public had projected onto her. Camilla began appearing at low-profile events, the opening of a health clinic, a fundraising event for the Osteoporosis Society. She always stood in the background, away from the cameras, letting Charles be the one to speak. Every gesture, every outfit was carefully calculated, nothing too luxurious, nothing showy, nothing that might evoke memories of Diana. One of Prince Charles's media team members later recalled, "We called it the softening strategy." She didn't argue, didn't complain. She simply nodded and quietly complied. I know. But no matter how hard the media team worked, the skepticism lingered. Polls showed that more than half of Britons still opposed the relationship. Some even stated bluntly on national television, "She may become the prince's wife, but she will never be our princess." Yet, as the public wrestled between sympathy and resentment, one question became harder and harder to ignore. If Charles was truly determined to marry Camilla, could the monarchy survive yet another crisis? And as that winter came to an end, the final answer slowly began to reveal itself. February 2005. A brief official statement was released from Clarence House. Prince Charles would marry Camilla Parker Bowles. Just one short sentence, but it sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom. There was no Buckingham Palace balcony, no gilded carriage, no ringing bells from Westminster Abbey. To avoid reopening public wounds, they chose the least ceremonial path, a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall, followed by a quiet blessing at St. George's Chapel. To many, this wasn't a royal wedding, it was a late, awkward marriage, reluctantly wrapped in legitimacy. In a controversial decision, Queen Elizabeth II announced she would not attend the wedding. As the head of the Church of England, which discourages remarriage after divorce, she chose to keep her distance. It was a silent but weighty message. She accepted the marriage as an unavoidable reality, not as a celebration. That morning, as Camilla stepped out of the car, she was no longer the most hated woman in Britain, but she had not been forgiven either. Some in the crowd held signs of protest along the narrow Windsor streets. "Diana will always be our princess." Inside the simple town hall room, there were no television cameras, no tiaras, only a few dozen close guests, and two people who had defied everything to arrive at that moment. After the ceremony, Charles and Camilla got into the car and past a crowd that watched with a mixture of curiosity and cold detachment. For them, it was the end of a long road of isolation. But for many others, it was only the beginning of another question. Can the monarchy endure when its symbol is a love once cursed by the nation, after the quiet wedding in Windsor. The House of Windsor entered a new era, one marked by caution and a point of no return. Camilla became the Duchess of Cornwall, a carefully chosen title that avoided invoking Princess of Wales, a name forever associated with Diana. It was also the royal family's unspoken acknowledgement of a painful truth. Even if Camilla married Charles, she would never replace the memory of the woman he lost. The British press no longer chased her with the same frenzy. But the first images of Camilla in her new royal role were scrutinized down to the last detail. She appeared at small ceremonies, always taking a step behind Charles, avoiding direct eye contact with the public. Observers recall that in those early appearances, she never laughed aloud, only nodded gently, spoke softly, as if reminding herself, "I am a guest in this life." Charles, on the other hand, seemed relieved. After years of hiding, he could finally hold the hand of the woman he called his soulmate. To him, this was not merely a marriage. It was a declaration. Personal happiness matters more than the expectations of an empire. But for many Britons, the marriage would never be whole. Diana remained ever present.
And Charles turned around and said, "What in ever in love means."
On magazine covers, in the nation's collective memory, and in the eyes of Princes William and Harry, each time Camilla wore a brooch from the royal collection, the press asked,
"Do a more discreet thing," which ultimately wasn't discreet, but I chose to hurt myself instead of hurting all of you.
did she have the right to wear the legacy of a woman the public had never truly let go? This was life after the wedding, a life lived between two emotional poles, a slowly forming acceptance, and a doubt that never quite faded. Because even though they had legalized their relationship, they could never legitimize the memory of a nation. Each time the Duchess appeared alongside Charles on the Buckingham Palace balcony, public sentiment split in two. On one side, a cautious tolerance for a man who had spent too many years in hiding. On the other, a lingering sorrow for Diana, the woman who never got to enjoy her freedom before. It was tragically cut short. William and Harry grew up in the shadow of those divided emotions. They had to learn how to share royal space with the very woman who had once deeply hurt their mother. It's said that the first private meeting between William and Camilla after the wedding was so tense, no one dared to breathe too loudly. Just a few polite words were exchanged. And then they parted, as if everyone in the room understood some boundaries can never be erased. But time is a patient force. With each passing year, new photos slowly replaced old ones in the press. Camilla appeared more frequently at Charles's side, attending openings, inauguration, and international receptions. She never tried to become a second Diana. Instead, she chose to step back, allowing herself to be known by the modest title Duchess of Cornwall. Still, the public did not fully soften. In 2020, when Netflix released a new season of The Crown, a fresh wave of anger erupted. The hashtag number Camilla flooded social media. Many of those expressing outrage had never even lived through that era, but their fury was as if they had witnessed it firsthand. Because some wounds are not measured in years, they are measured in the trust that was lost forever. The year was 2022. When the royal standard was lowered atop Balmoral Castle, the world understood. An era had come to an end. Queen Elizabeth II had passed away, leaving the throne to her eldest son, the man who had once nearly jeopardized the monarchy for love. Charles became King Charles III, and Camilla, once labeled the other woman, was officially given the title Queen Consort. For some, it was the long-awaited conclusion to a decades-long love story, but for millions of others, it was simply a moment that reopened a wound that had never truly healed. At the coronation, as Charles placed his hand upon the symbolic orb of power. Many television cameras slowly panned to Camilla. Her face revealed emotion, but also a flicker of unease. Because she knew, even as queen, she could never replace Diana in the collective memory. Thousands of comments still echoed the same sentiment. Diana is the real queen in our hearts. Orinov. At that very moment, a new trend surged across social media. TikTok videos that placed radiant images of Diana beside the throne she never reached, overlaid with the caption, "If things had been different." Today, we would have had Queen Diana. Hey sos. Royal watchers called this the final great challenge for Charles. How to lead a weakened monarchy while the legacy of his late wife still loomed like a silent judgment. Because a crown can be given by ceremony, but respect and the love of a nation are never guaranteed by ritual. Today, when people speak of the story of Charles and Camilla, it still cannot be called a simple love story. Because it was never just a relationship between two individuals, it was a collision between tradition and the longing for personal happiness. A quiet, yet ruthless battle that shook the foundations of the Windsor throne for more than 3 decades. When Charles ascended the throne, many wondered, had history finally turned the page on its long tragedy? But Britain's collective memory is far too enduring to forget so quickly. Each time Queen Camilla stands beside her husband during a national ceremony, there are still glances of scrutiny, still questions left unanswered. Does this crown still carry the shadow of an unforgiven past? Perhaps Charles himself understands this. At the annual memorial for Diana, he still sends white flowers to her statue, a silent gesture, as if to say the apology he's never spoken aloud. And when the official portraits of the new reign were unveiled, people still noticed the indescribable absence, the void left by a woman who is gone, but never truly absent. For William and Harry, their parents' story has become an inheritance, one woven with pain, conflict, and a sobering reminder that love, honor, and power rarely coexist peacefully. They grew up trying to emerge from that shadow, but no matter how strong they became, they could never deny the childhood years shaped by a love story the entire nation had watched unfold. More than 2 decades have passed since that fateful night in Paris. And yet, even now, people still ask, if things had gone differently, if braver choices had been made, would Diana still be here? Would the royal family have preserved its fairy tale image intact? Perhaps there will never be an answer, because history cannot be rewritten. And Diana's legacy, her gentleness, her yearning for freedom, and the loneliness that marked her final years, remains a poignant reminder that beneath all the power and splendor, the human heart is more fragile than any crown. That is the indelible echo of a love story, a royal crisis, and a legacy that changed the British monarchy forever.